Welcome to the Becoming Boundaried Show, Darlene. I am so excited to talk to you about all things codependency.
Oh, thank you, Krista, for inviting me. It's a real privilege to be able to talk to your audience.
Awesome. Awesome. We'll dive in from the very beginning. You know, this show is primarily, obviously, about boundaries, becoming boundaried.
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't very long into this beautiful boundary work that I started to realize you can't have a conversation, Darlene, about boundaries unless you're really willing to also have a conversation about codependency. And I find that there's such stigma around the word, and we can kind of talk a little bit about why that is. But I think a really great place for us to start is what in the world is codependency? What are we talking about when we use this word?
Okay, well, there's no one definition. So it goes back to the 70s when researchers were looking at families of alcoholics and addicts, and they saw that the partner was enabling the addiction, and they called it a co-alcoholic, that person. So then they saw that the symptoms of the co-alcoholic persisted after their partner got sober and actually preceded the marriage. That they stem from childhood dysfunction. I don't have to go into all the reasons, but it stemmed from childhood. And then even if they left the marriage or the partner got sober, the same symptoms persisted. So they started looking at as a separate phenomenon, a disorder. It's not in the diagnostic code. It's not considered a mental disorder. Probably, more than half of Americans would qualify.
For sure.
If you wrote a blog, you're in the majority. So, and then if you go to other countries, it's considered they don't call it codependency because a lot of the symptoms that we would say are dysfunctional are considered the norm there in collectivist cultures, where the families are very enmeshed. Shame is very prevalent in child rearing and controlling behavior, and everybody is part of the family. Everybody knows what's going on. So it's a very different idea. It's a Western idea. So I don't want to think that it's the norm universally. So, or the ideal universally. So I came up with my own definition.
Oh, I love that.
And it's not far from some other theorists, but it wasn't the mainstream definition, because the mainstream sees addicts and codependents as separate. But in my definition, an addict is codependent too. So, and it's not like Melody Beatty, who wrote one of the first books. Her definition involved being controlled by somebody else or controlling somebody else. So it was referring to a relationship. So I think codependency has to do with the individual, whether you're in a relationship or not. So some people are not in relationships. They think, I'm not codependent, I'm so independent. But if they get in a relationship, their behavior starts to show up as codependent. So I think it's a disorder of the self. And it starts in, you could say, infancy. It's transgenerational. It starts as a toddler. So before you're in your first relationship is with your parent. And that's where it starts. But that's actually not just codependency. That's how you form a self. Relationship with your first caretaker. And that becomes dysfunctional if you have a codependent parent, if you have a parent that's depressed, has mental illness, has too many children, is not available for whatever reason. So my definition is a person whose thinking and behavior revolves around someone else rather than coming from their innate self. There's debate about whether codependency is an addiction. to a person, or another process like gambling, overeating, sex addiction, or a substance, food or drugs, alcohol. So your thinking and behavior revolves around the object of that obsession, whatever that is.
Can you be codependent with shopping? Can you be codependent
Well,
with?
yeah, there's shopaholics.
Yeah.
People get that would be a process addiction.
Okay.
Okay. Some people are collectors. Some people can become obsessed with exercise.
Yeah.
So and they get very anxious if they don't exercise. They get afraid that they're going to become unfit or gain weight or so, because everything revolves around that. Workaholism.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in essence, then, are you saying that the work, the exercise, the shopping, the other person, whatever it is, we're dependent on them? This is what I'm hearing you say, and I could be wrong. We are dependent on them to build ourself, or to feel whole or complete, or however we want to frame that.
It's a very good way of putting it. And as a result, your thinking and your behavior revolves around that, rather than coming from, what do I want? What do I feel? What do I need?
Yeah.
All like, when am I going to get the next drink? Or what am I going to eat for dinner? Or what is she thinking? Or what does my boyfriend feel about me? And it's all a reaction, to something outside yourself. And it's because of this emptiness inside, and a lack of a connection to the core inner self, because it wasn't nurtured in childhood growing up. But the problem, Krista, is that when we start looking outside for our self-esteem, or for to feel okay about ourselves, the gap between our real self and what we want, it becomes farther and farther apart. It's like we're trying to be whole, but we keep looking outside. And the more and more we look outside, and that becomes the addictive process, because we become emptier and emptier inside. So someone who's codependent and doesn't get treatment, and especially if they're in a dysfunctional or destructive relationship with an addict or abuse, they become a shell of themselves in the late stages of codependency. They may even turn to some sort of other addiction to cope. Compulsive behavior, they go into depression and despair, because they keep looking outside and looking outside, and they get further and further away from who they are. And they have they're like a shell of themselves. It's like a gambler who gambles away all their money, and then they're bankrupt. Yeah. And codependent can become bankrupt too.
Yeah.
They lose themselves. They complain, I lose myself in a relationship. Yeah. I give up myself in the relationship. And the longer that goes on, the further they get and the emptier they feel from who they really are. They keep adapting. They go along to get along. Yeah. They give up their needs, their wants. Yeah. They lose touch with their feelings.
Yeah. So you mentioned, Darlene, and I want to actually go back to, just a moment, sort of the beginnings of codependency. But you also mentioned there's stages of codependency, and that perked my curiosity.
Well, there's stages of addiction. It's considered by some a disease. So a disease has stages, where the beginning stage, the middle stage, and the late stage. And then you reverse that. And I have diagrams and discussion of this on my website, the stages of addiction and recovery, or codependency recovery. And then in recovery, you go through stages too. The early stages, the middle stage, and the later stage, where you're becoming more whole and you have less symptoms. It's like a V. You can go down as you get worse, and then you get better and you go up. Same with alcoholism. Yeah. So like a disease, you could say it never fully goes away. You have it like an alcoholic, you could say, is always has that allergy to alcohol. So they stay abstinent so they don't go down again. And a codependent stays in recovery, and they, depending on where they are on that spectrum, they monitor their behavior, they still do self-care, and then they stay healthy as they get better.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that framework. So circling back to my question is really what makes people codependent? And you said it usually comes from that relationship with parents, with caregivers. Is that always what it is, Darlene, or can it sometimes happen outside of childhood?
Well, I suppose it could be in a relationship that's abusive, if it's long enough. Sometimes that could happen in later stages. But if you have a healthy sense of self, you probably wouldn't stay in an abusive, imbalanced relationship for too long.
Yeah, you'd probably catch the red flag pretty quick.
Mm-hmm. And your self-esteem would say, this isn't working for me, and I'm moving on.
So the caregiver, the parents, are to mirror back to us our worth, our value, our enoughness. And I'm hearing you say that when that doesn't happen, there's a rift, there's a disconnect from our enoughness, from our value. Is that correct?
Well, there's two things. It's just we don't get to develop who we are.
Yeah.
So healthy parenting, a parent, if the baby's laughing and smiling and the mother smiles back, the baby's sad and the mother looks sad, the baby needs to be changed, the mother changes it, the baby's hungry, the mother feeds it, she responds to the baby, it could be the father too, it responds to the baby's needs. So if she's depressed, she's not going to show those feelings. So she's not going to mirror that. And as a child gets older, then she names the feelings. And the father, oh, I see you're angry. What happened? I see you're sad. And then they give comfort. Yeah. They give mirroring and they give help. And you mentioned about worth. So shame is a core symptom of codependency. And I wrote a whole book about shame, and
it's fantastic.
Thank you. And children need to feel that they're accepted for who they are by both parents. So sometimes you get that from one parent, but not the other. So that's still a wound. Ideally it's from both. And it's not enough to say, I love you. Parents will say, oh, I love you so much and I hug you. But it's about valuing you it's two things, valuing you for who you are, your authentic self, not because you're doing well in school. Parents want that, but in other words, you don't withhold love for that, not because you're just doing what they want, you're going into sports, you're learning the violin or whatever it is that parent wants, or because you're pretty. So a parent embraces you as a whole person for who you are. Secondly, they have to want a relationship with you. So they want to interact with you and spend time with you. That they value your feelings and your needs. So it's not just, I'm going to, I'm the parent and you're the child, and this is what you have to do. I actually want a relationship with you. So that means time and interest, not just performing maternal or paternal duties.
You can feel that, right? And kids especially can feel that, mom and dad. And I mean, here's where I could go off on a tangent. We could do a whole nother podcast on this issue, but people glued to their cell phones when their kids are doing X, Y, and Z, and I understand we've all got work to do. We've all got deadlines, we've got things, but when there's no break from that and you're not looking up, really attuning to that child's needs and that child's emotion, oh my gosh, it looks like, Johnny, you're having such a good time swinging on that swing. That brings me such delight to see you so happy. When they're not getting any of that because we've got, a computer device glued to our faces, or there can be a million other reasons. I don't want to just blame, cell phones and technology and social media, but that is, I think, a little bit where we're headed in today's world if we're not careful and remember that it's a beautiful tool that we have to shut off.
That's right. I mean, I've observed children trying to talk to their parent and the parents on the phone, and ignoring. That's shaming right there. So it's not intent. It doesn't have to be demeaning words that you say to your child. Just your behavior, ignoring them, not giving time to them, can feel shaming too.
Yeah.
So
I really love that you also said, I really, really love that you also said, just had to clarify that twice, because it's very important, I think, that you said it's not just enough to say words, I love you.
You have to walk the talk, So
Yeah.
I had a patient once whose parents put so much effort into helping them, getting tutors and everything to bring up their grades. And it made their child feel like she wasn't enough.
Yeah.
So they were thinking they're doing all this out of love.
Yeah.
So, there's other ways. And then it's like, how could you forget your homework? Like a simple statement like that, that's shaming. Yeah. It's like, what's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you? How can you be so stupid? Are you dumb? It's almost like that little innuendo, those unspoken words.
How could you do that?
Yeah.
So, I mean, parents do things like that all the time, unwittingly.
Yeah.
Now, that's not going to cause a person to be codependent or have shame the rest of their life. But if this is a pattern, and usually it is, a pattern, it could be subtle, like things like that. Or sometimes it's acute, with really degrading words or physical violence, abuse, physical abuse, things like that, sexual abuse. But it could also be very mild and subtle.
Yeah.
And it sends a message.
Yeah.
Just a parent just not being too interested in you. So.
And I don't think it, if you're listening and you're freaking out because you're a parent, there's no need to freak out. And we have to start having some of these conversations. There has to be some awareness. There has to be some light shown on how we're showing up in the world when it comes to any relationship. I think.
Yeah, I can give an example from my own childhood.
Yeah,
So,
I'd love that.
I had a narcissistic mother. And at the end of oftentimes she would say, so what happened in school? Or with your friends, and then would be followed with a lot of advice. And I remember I wished she had a friend, a couple that I knew, and I always really liked this woman, and I sometimes wished like she was my mother. And when she would come over, she would take such delight in talking to me. You could see she was almost like effervescent, bubbling over with interest. So tell me, darling, what are you doing? What are you interested in? And so she really showed that I felt like she was really interested in me and some of the things I was interested in. So my mother was interested in what she was interested in. So that would be like very narcissistic. Yeah. So that's important too. In other words, taking interest in what your child is interested in, not your agenda for them.
Yeah. Yeah. Super important. And I actually have a similar story. I didn't have someone like you're speaking about come into my life until I was 18. And then again, when I was about 23 or 24, that really was an older woman mentor that took interest in who I was, and actually was able to start to mirror to me who you actually are, Krista, is okay.
Yeah.
Because I didn't believe that. Going back to your book, it's why one of the reasons, many reasons why I loved your book so much is I carried that belief. I'm not good enough. There's something wrong with me. I'm broken. I'm flawed, which is sort of the core belief when it comes to shame. I am bad. There's inherently something wrong with me.
That's right. So a lot of parents think they're helping their children. They're constantly wanting to improve them.
Yeah.
And I have a little video on my website about my approach to therapy. And I say people come to counseling to change themselves. What they don't realize is all they need to do is accept themselves.
Yes.
And
Amen.
then things change, actually, when you start
Amen.
doing it.
It's so true. It's so true. That's really what I believe, Darlene, self-love is all about, is self-acceptance. We don't have to love all parts of ourselves. I don't love some of my wrinkly skin as I'm aging, but I have to accept it. And when I accept it, oh, that just feels so good to my system.
Yeah, that's who you are.
Yeah.
That's self-esteem. It doesn't mean, self-esteem doesn't mean that I think I'm the greatest. A narcissist would think that, but that's not real self-esteem because it's not grounded in reality. So self-esteem is accepting my limitations too. To be able to say, well, I'm not good at that. That isn't one of my strengths, but I take pride in these other things that I do that I am good at.
Yeah.
So it's realistic. It's humble. You accept your strengths and you accept your limitations too.
Yeah. Owning your gifts, owning your talents, owning your skills, and owning your limitations.
Yeah.
All of it.
And that we're human beings and we have flaws.
Yep. Yep. Okay. So talk to us a little bit about the symptoms, because I know there's going to be some listeners wondering now at this point, okay, am I codependent? What are some things I need to look for, watch for? What are some red flags?
Okay. Well, I think there's like 5 core symptoms. And the first one is denial. So, and they call that the hallmark of addiction. So people are in denial of their codependency. They're in denial of they might be in denial that they're in an abusive relationship or that they're with an addict. They might know that something's wrong, but they don't really realize the impact of it. There's levels of denial. I talk a lot. I have a whole chapter on denial because it's so important. So it doesn't mean you're totally blind, but maybe you rationalize things, you minimize things, you make excuses for bad behavior, or you think, well, he doesn't mean it, or she had a rough childhood, you excuse it, or it doesn't really hurt. You deny your feelings and you deny needs. So codependents often, because their parents didn't mirror their needs or their feelings, people, not everybody, but many codependents aren't really conscious of what they're feeling and conscious of what they need because they're not asking for their needs or what they want. Sometimes they're so used to giving other people what they want and other people what they need. And as I said in the definition, attuning to other people's feelings. What is he feeling? What is she feeling? What do they want? What do they need? That they have no clue about what they're feeling or what they need or what they want. They may leave an abusive relationship, for example, and then feel kind of lost if they haven't done any work on themselves. They don't even know what they want, or it's hard for them to ask for their needs or their wants. It's a big part of recovery, overcoming denial. Yeah. And then I mentioned shame. So shame is a core symptom, and shame leads to guilt. It leads to low self-esteem. It leads to fear. And over time, it could lead to depression. One of the things people are afraid of is being shamed, being rejected, as you said, being laughed at, someone not liking them, someone rejecting them, someone criticizing them. So all of these symptoms kind of overlap. And shame, I think, is, I wrote a blog, it's the core of addiction. It's the core of codependency too, in my book, Overcoming Shame, Conquering Shame. And shame leads to a lot of the other symptoms. It leads to problems with intimacy and autonomy. So that's a symptom. Codependents typically have intimacy issues. They usually have insecure attachment, which means they either are afraid and withdraw from relationships, or they are anxious and keep wanting to attach. So either one, they're insecure and they withdraw, or they're insecure and they pursue. So a lot of codependents are unhappy in their relationships because they feel like they're smothered or they're not getting enough intimacy. They keep complaining that they're dating unavailable men, unavailable women. They don't realize that they're unavailable.
Mm.
So
How would that tie in, Darlene, then just real quick to vulnerability?
well, vulnerability, authenticity, which includes being vulnerable, is the antidote to shame. So if you don't feel worthy, if you don't feel lovable, you're going to be very careful about what you say. Or if you've been judged or abused or criticized growing up, then also, or in a prior relationship, you're going to edit what you say. Okay. And getting back to denial, if you don't know what you feel, you're not going to be able to express your feelings.
Yeah.
Which brings me to another symptom, dysfunctional communication. So you talk about boundaries. I think boundaries are like the graduate course in assertiveness.
Yeah.
It's the end result. It's like, grad school, because first there's a lot of steps before you can set boundaries.
Totally.
Okay. So first of all, you have to be able to know what you feel. It's not like you look something up in a book and what's the appropriate boundary here? It's not going to work if you try to do that.
Nope.
Or if you ask your therapist, what boundary should I set? A good therapist will say, well, how are you feeling in that situation? So is it helping you to feel good about yourself, or are you feeling bad? It's just, keep it simple. Do you feel better or you feel worse? You feel good or you feel bad? And then being able to name your feelings. That's another step. Now, some people already are able to do that, even though they're codependent, but many people don't. And so being able to identify your feelings, name your feelings. In my dummies book, I have a list of 200 feelings. And research has showed that it's helpful to say it out loud and name yourself. So I might say, oh, Darlene, you're angry. And I would add, and it's okay. Yeah. Because shame is not just about who you are. I go into this in a lot of detail in my book on shame. Your feelings can get shamed. It's called shame bonded. Your needs can get shamed. Certain attributes can, like your body might have been shamed. So different aspects of yourself can be shamed. So if your feelings are shamed or your needs are shamed, then you're going to have trouble identifying them and speaking up about them. So getting back to boundaries. So identifying and naming your feelings. And then the next step is feeling you're entitled to them. Feeling worthy. It's not enough to say that I am angry. You have to feel like it's okay to be angry. And then being able to identify your needs. Okay, I'm angry. What do I need? Am I just going to withdraw? Maybe you don't realize that you have a right to set a boundary, that you have a right to your feelings, that you have a right to your needs. I once did a seminar with many women in recovery. And I was giving a talk on boundaries. And I asked women, first write down a list of your rights that you think you have, and then make a fist and stamp your foot and say out loud each of those rights. Like, I have a right to my feelings. Say it with conviction. And almost all the participants started giggling and laughing. They felt so uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Asserting their rights. So you have to be able to name your feelings, identify them, value them, the same with your needs and your rights. Okay, so that's a lot of work in itself. Then
Well, yeah, because for a codependent, and I can attest to this, knowing your feelings and your needs is like someone's talking Japanese. In those, when you're first dipping your toe in the water of this work, it's like, what do you mean feelings? Like, I'm supposed to feel something? And I'm being a little tongue in cheek, but truly that's what it was for me. But you keep going and you keep building the muscle.
Right. So, and then the next step is getting the words. You're not used to, speaking up. So you have to learn to be assertive, to make I statements. I feel, I need, I want. Okay, so those are basic, and that takes time and practice. And then the next step is setting a boundary. I don't like it when you do this. Don't talk to me that way. I don't feel responsible for that. I'm not going to do that. I won't go here or there. No is a boundary. Mm-hmm. So codependents typically think that being assertive sounds very brusque or rude, just by saying the truth of what they feel and what they want or what they need. It sounds very harsh to them. And then to say no to someone or set a boundary, they feel it's selfish. That comes to the rights, having the right to do that.
Well, and it even comes to understanding and knowing, and I don't know where you would put this, but working on your beliefs in terms of understanding that boundaries actually are healthy. There's a lot of folks that I coach and work with and talk to. They believe that boundaries are selfish and mean and rigid and harsh. So working on that belief that boundaries are one of the most kind and loving things that you can do, because you're actually saying, here's what I want, here's what I need, and here's how you can be successful. Here's how we can be successful in relationship together.
And relationships can't survive without boundaries.
Can't survive.
Yeah. So codependents have dysfunctional boundaries, okay? And then another core symptom is control. So control doesn't necessarily mean giving orders. It might mean controlling yourself. I'm not going to make mistakes. I'm not going to do anything that's foolish. I'm not going to show anybody my vulnerability. I'm not going to cry. It also can come across as people pleasing. I'm going to indirectly control you by, it's like a passive manipulation, by doing whatever you want, so then you'll like me. Or often it's taking care of somebody else. I'm going to help you. I'm going to tell you what to do, giving a lot of advice. And then they feel put out if the other person doesn't follow their advice. So they think they're morally superior that way. And so there's different ways that control can come across.
Well, and there's where perfectionism would tie in so beautifully with codependency, correct? Trying to control how you looked and how you showed up and just your Instagram feed or whatever, making yourself look like you've got the perfect life and you've got everything all together.
Okay. So perfectionism is a defense to shame. Okay. Because if I'm perfect, nobody can find fault with me. Now, I don't see that as a core symptom because not every codependent is a perfectionist, but it is a common symptom. In fact, so common that I wrote a book on overcoming perfectionism, and all my books are workbooks. So, and then dependency, of course, is a symptom. And because we're so focused on someone else and we need that person to reflect well on us and make us happy and not leave us, we become dependent on them because we're looking to them for our sense of self and self-esteem. So those are 5 core symptoms, and you can see how they all overlap.
Yeah. Beautiful. Thank you for walking us through that, Darlene. That was so helpful. So really in that, you actually unpacked some of the ways in which we can start to move towards recovery, some of the ways that we can start our growth and our healing. And that is being able to name your feelings. You know, even if it is, for starters, I feel good, I feel bad. And then moving from there, I feel angry, sad, happy, just the simple ones at first. Feeling that you're entitled to those feelings. I'm just kind of going over this so that the listeners really, you know, can have this land for them. So feeling entitled to your feelings, identifying your needs, which of course, you know, that's so important too. When we do the boundary work, you have to ground your boundary into what it is you actually need, right? So identifying your needs is part of the healing work. Getting the words, I feel, I need, I want. And I think that's so important because I noticed something that I used to do a lot, and I've really had to become conscious of it to break the pattern, was I generalized. So I was never owning, I feel, I need, I want. So I'm trying to think of an example right now, but it was sort of this mentality. Well, everybody loves pistachio ice cream.
Right. You're saying to your partner or something, you should treat women a certain way.
Yeah.
Well, women want this or that, rather, so you don't own it.
Yes. So I never had to own anything.
Right.
Yeah. So those I statements were something that I really, really focused on for a very long time until they were habitual for me, really taking ownership and responsibility.
Okay. Good.
Yeah.
So, and when you're feeling some negative feeling, then it's a good time to ask yourself, what do I need? Because you may not know automatically what you need. You know, for a long time, this is a typical codependent behavior, and addicts too, is to isolate. So if I was feeling sad or shame or lonely or something, instead of reaching out, I would isolate. It didn't occur to me that I should reach out. It sounds so dumb, but because of my childhood or whatever, well, it wasn't safe really to reach out to a narcissistic parent. So I talked to my cat. So it wasn't an automatic thing to reach out to people if I was feeling bad. It was like, oh, well, I'm not good company now, I'm going to withdraw.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and you said something really key, which was that you didn't feel safe.
So I'm so glad you're emphasizing this and about the caretaking. So I have a blog called Whatever Happened, Paradise Lost. What happened to my true self? Where did it go? So when you're an infant, when the mother comes to the crib, into the toddler, and what we said, nurturing, meeting the baby's needs, the baby can then feel like in a state of bliss that all is right with the world. And I have a need and I cry, and then mother comes and she takes care of me, or whatever it is, she plays with me. And it's kind of a paradise. It's a blissful state. So if the mother isn't doing that, either she comes and she's in a bad mood, or she doesn't attune to what the baby needs and gives the baby what she thinks the baby, she's not like tuned into the baby. There are a lot of ways where there's misattunement or just neglect. So what happens is that baby doesn't feel, like you said, safe to relax and know that its needs will get met. Instead, it starts becoming like hypervigilant. What's the expression on mother's face? Is she coming? Is she not coming? And they start tuning into the environment to look for signs of, is it safe? Is it not safe? Rather than going inside and feeling all is right with the world inside. And, oh, I feel this need or this urge or this instinct, and getting in touch with that and know that it will be taken care of. So that's the safety. So, but even beyond, toddlerhood and childhood, I would say that many, I don't know if it's how many, the majority, but many codependents have maybe never felt safe. They're in relationships. It might not be abuse, but they don't feel safe to be free to be them. You use the word vulnerable, be authentic. They don't feel safe. And it may not be the result of their partner. It may not be that the partner caused it. It may be how they've always been, right? So, but they don't know that they don't feel safe.
Yeah.
And so they have nothing to compare it to. So they keep getting in relationships with people who are not safe, and they think it's exciting or it's drama. And they don't realize there's another way, that they think somebody who's healthy is boring.
Yeah.
And so then they look for, the addict, the narcissist, someone with a mood disorder to feel alive. And they don't realize they're not safe. They think it's exciting. It's intense. And they confuse anxiety with excitement. Especially if, for instance, if they were sexually abused, they wouldn't know that. And that's a big problem, because they think, oh, this is chemistry. This person is so exciting. It's like, and they don't realize they're anxious. They don't feel safe to express their needs. They don't feel safe to say no. They don't feel safe to disagree. They just go along and hope the relationship will blossom. And this is one of the problems where people, I just wrote this book on narcissism, where they get involved with narcissists. And it is very thrilling and exciting. Narcissists could be very charming, but it's also not safe. And they miss those cues because they're not in touch with themselves. Again, the codependent is looking outside.
Yeah.
Do they like me or don't they like me? Not how do I feel?
Yeah.
What do I
Wouldn't
want?
you, before we dive into the new book, would you say that those anxious feelings, sort of I don't know why the word drama comes to mind, but you mentioned boredom. So I'm thinking the opposite would kind of be some quote unquote excitement or drama, or a little bit of like chaos, whatever the word would be. That's because that actually sort of feels familiar to the codependent.
It could be two things. It could be because it's familiar from their family. It could also be enlivening. So if they're not in touch with their own feelings, maybe they're in relationship with someone who's like all feelings, like someone with a borderline personality disorder or bipolar or something. So they sort of thrive off of the other person, or the drama helps them. I mentioned emptiness inside. So if they're not in touch with their own inner world and their own feelings, and so then they kind of feed off of the excitement that the other person provides. It could be someone drinking and or using drugs, and their ups and downs.
Yeah.
So there could be several reasons.
Okay. So let's dive into dating, loving, and leaving a narcissist. So what's the connection, Darlene, between a codependent and a narcissist?
Okay, well, there's many. First of all, shame underlies both. If you look at most of the symptoms of codependency, they're based in shame, which I go into in my book on shame. If you look at a narcissist, just about all of their behavior is to make them feel better and lift them up. Their arrogance, their sense of entitlement, to their need for a lot of admiration, their grandiosity. All this is to pump up themselves so they don't feel shame. And they end up looking down at people, and they're arrogant and feel superior. Whereas the codependent is sort of like a seesaw. They don't feel like they're enough. It's more conscious than it is with the narcissist. And they often idealize the narcissist. Oh, he is so bold and decisive. He's a leader. He's so funny. He's so smart, and she's so beautiful, and she's so talented. And so they end up idealizing often traits they don't have in themselves, or just traits of the other person to compensate for not feeling good. And the narcissist, maybe in the beginning, will idealize you and feel like it lifts him or her up to be around you. So I'm going to be with somebody rich and then powerful, and that makes me feel more important. But then after they feel like they caught you and the relationship is more committed, then they start fault finding, and then they project their own inner shame onto you. They start devaluing you. So shame is one issue. And then boundaries. Narcissists don't have boundaries either. The difference is that narcissists don't see others as separate from themselves. They see others as extensions of themselves. Codependents see themselves as extensions of others. It's like the flip side. It's the reverse. They don't see themselves as separate. Narcissists focus on themselves as being great and getting their needs met. Codependents focus on others and put the other person first. So it fits like hand in glove. So those are some ways which they interact. In my book on narcissism, Dating, Loving, and Leaving a Narcissist, I have a whole chapter on codependency, and I go through all the symptoms that I mentioned, and I show how they're similar or just how they manifest differently with the narcissist and codependent, because actually I think a narcissist is codependent too.
Yeah, I've wondered about that. Yeah. So you do believe that a narcissist is codependent as well?
Yeah, they're very dependent on somebody else to feed off of, and to lift them up.
Yeah, to fill their supply.
Exactly. And to feel good about themselves. And a compliment isn't enough. They need it all day long.
Yeah.
So, and they're very thin-skinned because of the shame underneath. So there's a lot of ways they're very similar, but it looks different on the outside. And because they feel very entitled and special, and rules don't apply to them, and they should come first. Well, codependents, the typical codependent, needs more entitlement. They feel unentitled, as you were saying, to their rights and to their needs. So again, it's like the inverse or the mirror image. So
Yeah.
put them together and you're whole.
Why do you think that we're seeing so much conversation happening right now about narcissists? I'm seeing the word everywhere. Is it just that I'm focused in on it now? I feel like the topic has really come to light. Like, people are wanting to have that conversation. Is it just mislabeling, like, oh, everybody's a narcissist now? Or is it that we're starting to really become more aware?
Well, I think in general, the public is becoming more and more aware of abuse, for instance, even emotional abuse. It didn't used to be illegal, but now emotional, in some states, emotional abuse is considered domestic violence if it's severe enough, child abuse. So all these things are getting more attention. Addiction used to be something you never talked about, and now it's very public. And I think we could thank Donald Trump for making narcissism a term that's thrown around the coffee table. So people didn't used to identify it as much. So, and now they're calling out different celebrities as being narcissists. Well, first of all, there's much higher prevalence of narcissism among politicians and celebrities because they want attention.
Yeah.
There's no such thing as bad press, to a narcissist. So even if it's negative, at least they're in the public eye.
Yeah.
So in those professions, also hierarchical organizations like the military or law enforcement, or a corporation, because they like to compete, because they like to be on top.
They feel powerful.
Power is, here's another contrast and how codependents and narcissists fit together. So a narcissist will prioritize power. That to them keeps them safe.
Yeah.
So a codependent will prioritize the relationship because that keeps them safe.
Yeah.
If I can make you love me and connect with you, then I'll feel safe. A narcissist prioritizes power and he'll sacrifice the relationship to get it. Because if he's on top, then he feels safe. But a codependent will prioritize the relationship and sacrifice themselves to keep it.
Yeah.
So again, they both put the narcissist first. That's part of the problem. My whole book is all about changing the balance of power and reclaiming yourself and reclaiming your power. It's really about personal transformation. It's not just about calling out the narcissist. It's about where can you find your own power?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people want to leave and they are afraid to leave, or they don't have the skills yet to leave. They haven't found their voice. You know, Echo, in the original myth of Narcissus and Echo, she lost her voice. She could only echo other people. She could only echo Narcissus. So that's typical of codependence, right? They don't have, because it doesn't come from inside. They're so focused outside. I have like a step-by-step plan, including scripts and that you can use and checklists. So you can build yourself, your autonomy, your self-esteem, and your assertiveness and how to set boundaries. So then you get stronger. And what you'll see is as the balance of power shifts, the narcissist starts to fall apart because they need to be on top to feel okay.
Yeah.
And you'll see that the power will shift in the relationship. And just to add that an abusive relationship is harder to leave than a healthy one. So don't shame yourself over that or try to push yourself.
Exactly. And where can people find your beautiful resources, and especially your new book? I can attest your books, your literature, even your blog, just so valuable. You provide so much amazing content that really can help people start to build awareness, start to gain some of their, as you said, autonomy, and really start taking their power back a little bit and owning who they really are. So I'm a big fan of your work, Darlene. Where specifically can you get this new book? Obviously, probably, the place with the big A.
Right, you can get it there. And on my website, whatiscodependency.com, or if you don't remember that, my name, Darlene Lancer, also links to that. There's links to the getting the book on Google Play. You can also get it a PDF on my website. There's links to Smashwords where you can get a version of it that works for Apple and Kobo and some other devices.
Okay. And we'll put a link in the show notes as well to your website and wherever else so that people can find you and get in touch with your amazing work.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, absolutely. Any other final tips that you want to share with the listeners?
Okay, well, I always tell people, if you think you're being abused, you probably are. And the tendency is to, again, isolate and withdraw. Some abusers intentionally, that's one of the manipulations and a tactic of an abuser, is to isolate you. Don't do that. Tell friends, tell your family, get professional help, go to Codependents Anonymous. If there's drugs or alcohol involved, go to Al-Anon meeting, go find an appropriate 12-step meeting. So get support because you're going to need that. And the first thing is getting information, and write down, start journaling about what's happening in your relationship.
Yeah.
So
I think that's really important because typically, unless you want to correct me here, with a narcissist, there tends to be, just by the natural byproduct of narcissism, a lot of gaslighting. So I always do advise folks to start documenting and writing things down so that you've got a paper trail, so that when that gaslighting starts and, oh, you're crazy, you're just crazy making again, you've got it written in black and white.
Right. On my website, on the media page, there were a lot of TV spots I did on gaslighting. So people can look at those too.
Yeah.
Remember Q-tip, quit taking it personally.
Yeah.
An abuser, and by the way, my book is for an abusive relationship, even if it's with an addict. Don't worry about the definition, or the diagnosis.
Yeah.
People get caught up, is he, is she, is he,
Yeah.
they want a label. It doesn't matter. If your needs are not getting met, if you think you may be being abused, this book can help you. And so the acronym I was going to say is Q-tip. Quit taking it personally, because an abuser's favorite weapon is projection. So half the time what they're saying about you, the negative things about you, they're really talking about themselves.
Yeah.
Because they don't see you as a separate person. A narcissist particularly, or someone with borderline personality, they may not see you as separate from themselves. They see you as an extension. They're seeing like a mirror of themselves. So anyway, whatever they're saying, it's more, there was an old saying years ago, consider the source.
Yeah. Yeah. Doesn't mean that it still doesn't internally hurt a little bit, but I think you're so right. When you can stop taking it personally, you start to deplete them a little bit of their narcissistic supply.
Well, when you react, you're feeding their power.
You're feeding their power. Bingo.
So there's another acronym, JADE, to remind you. You don't justify, you don't argue, you don't defend, and you don't explain. Any kind of those reactions, and I list a whole bunch of do's and don'ts in my book, feed the narcissist's power. You don't want to do that. Yeah. When you argue, when you justify, when you explain, all of that is like, can't you approve of me? Don't you see that I'm right? It's like giving them the power to judge you. Mm-hmm. And they don't care about the facts. The facts are irrelevant. All they want to do is have power over you, dominate. So when you argue, it gives them opportunity to dominate.
Yeah. Those are really potent little acronyms, Darlene. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. Well, this interview has been fantastic. Again, we're going to have all the links to all your goodies and all of the places people can find you in the show notes. Again, one more time, I can attest to your work and how powerful and beautiful and potent it really is. It's really helped me in some aspects of my life that I'm still working on and healing from. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome, and appreciate the opportunity to help people.
Thank you.